Okay, sure. Look, we'll kick off, Bart. Yeah. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and you're very welcome to this webinar hosted by the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. My name is John Eivers, and I have responsibility for plant health trade policy in the Department of Agriculture. Our webinar this afternoon will focus on the new import requirements of GB for plants and plant products and help inform and prepare Irish exporters for upcoming changes to GB import requirements following publication by the UK government of their target border operating manual in August of this year. The BTOM has now set out the import policy and timelines for sanitary and phytosanitary requirements and risk categories for import of goods into GB. I'm really delighted that we're joined on this webinar today by Jason Pollock and Victoria Clark from the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs at DEFRA in the UK, who will provide an overview of the new target operating manual as they relate to plants and plant products. And I'm also joined by colleagues, my colleague Michael Keane, who's a plant health inspector in the department, and who will deliver the second presentation and provide an overview of the process in obtaining a phytosanitary certificate for export and focus on how to navigate through the export certification system. Also, I'm joined by colleague Eilish Farley, who's the Plant Health Administrative Lead in the Plant Health team. You can input your questions, important housekeeping, into the question box, and important that you don't put them into the chat box, but into the question box as we go through the webinar, and at the end we'll have a questions and answer session. So I'll hand over to our first speaker, Jason Pollock from DEFRA UK. And Jason, as I said, is the Plant Health Delivery Lead for Exports on the Plant Health team. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you, John. So I will give a very brief presentation on the target operating model, but as a part of an introduction, so I'm Jason Pollock and I sit within DEFRA within the Biosecurity Border and Trade Programme and have responsibility for plants and plant products in terms of imports and exports. But what I'm going to do is give you a very brief overview of the TOM, but please do pop any questions into the question box as John has mentioned. Hopefully, like you say, you find it informative, but at the same time, just for those of you that aren't aware, obviously when I'm talking about plants and plant products, I'm talking about materials such as fruits, vegetables, plants for planting, cut flowers, could be seeds, probably not too relevant, but for this particular audience, but things like used agricultural machinery as well. So John obviously already mentioned, we obviously had the draft target operating model that was launched on the 13th of April, and that went out for consultation, and we received back quite a few comments on that, which we then took into account, updated the TOM, and then published the final version on the 29th of August, and you can get that on the gov.uk or simply just by Googling the border target operating model. You can download that document there, and it covers obviously a wide range of aspects, not just the SPS elements, so the sanitary and the phytosanitary side, but things like safety and security declarations and other checks that may occur at the border. Obviously, from a plant health perspective, it's going to be a phased introduction of the controls, and I'll be going through shortly what those phases are and the sort of the major milestones to look out for. But I think one of the first things to raise is that obviously one of the pillars of the target operating model was to look at the risk categories associated with plants and plant products. And broadly speaking, these were categorized into high, medium and low. And the controls that were placed on those different categories are proportionate to the risks that those goods pose. So you can see on the screen in front of you, so if you do have your camera phone out, you can see the QR codes, and they will take you to the Plant Health portal, where we've published what the relative risk categories are for EU goods and non-EU goods. Obviously, for this particular audience, the EU goods is probably more relevant, and you can see within there we'll have high, medium, low. The things that I'd like to point out around the different categories, obviously, if you're within the high risk side, there's probably already controls that are in place that you're already dealing with at the moment, but these are the goods that would be subject to higher rates of inspection upon import into GB. And then obviously the medium risk goods as well. And I'll go through the various milestones associated with those. I think the thing again to highlight here is that you will see within the risk categorization, there's references to like fruits and vegetables, cut flowers, and then areas such as parts of plants. But within the bottom of the document, you'll see asterisks that apply that explain exactly what we mean when we say parts of plants from a legislative side of things. The good news is that definition is exactly the same as the definition in the EU requirements. Obviously, we retained quite a lot of the EU law, so the definitions are exactly the same as what's in your current import requirement. So there isn't any deviation there at all. And then obviously within the low risk category side of things, we've almost labeled this as an area of exception, that if you're not mentioned in the high or the medium risk, then your goods fall into low risk. Because as you can appreciate, there's hundreds of thousands of different types of plants and plant products, and it would be very inefficient to be able to label absolutely all of them. However, like you say, I can provide links later on that if you have any questions around your risk categorizations, then there is email addresses that you can contact to seek any clarity if needed. So moving on from sort of the risk category side of things, the next step would be looking at what sort of commodity code you can use. And I appreciate this screen is a little bit on the busy side, but hopefully you can get an idea of when you go onto the risk category, and I'm using the example here of cut flowers of carnations, that you would find that they sit within the medium risk side of things. And then what we do have on the UK Plant Health Portal, again on that second bullet there, is a link to the Plant Health Portal page, which includes a spreadsheet around what commodity codes you can use when you're importing those goods into GB. So you would just pop in the scientific name of those goods, or EPO code if you know it, and then it would produce a list of the commodity codes that are available. And you can see from sort of the screen on the right here that actually there is quite a lot of commodity codes available, and it would depend on whether you're bringing in sort of the indoor outdoor plant version. You have the cut foliage, you've got the branches code there, and then potentially even the seeds code there. But for this example that's on the screen, you can see that the code here, the code here is the one for cut flowers, which I've highlighted up here because obviously it's a little bit small on the screen. But these are the sort of things that the tools that are available on the Plant Health Portal to help you determine which commodity codes you could use. But again, one of the key things to flag here when it comes to the pre-notification, and I will talk about this a little bit more, is the requirement for pre-notification is for either the GB importer or customs agent acting on behalf of the GB importer. It is not required for obviously yourselves in Ireland to be able to make those pre-notifications. And again, we're beholden to the same rules as what they were in the EU, in that you have to have countries either within the EU, if you're from Ireland, making those pre-notifications, and the same applies in the UK, that you have to be from GB to be able to make those pre-notifications. So just to be clear, you won't be responsible for making those IPAFS notifications. But obviously, if you're understanding what commodity codes you are using, it will make that information so much easier for the trader in GB in terms of making those notifications when they need to. So just jumping into the first milestone around January 2024, I'll go through each of the risk categories as well, just to explain what the main differences are before then moving on to the next milestone. So to begin with, in January 2024, you'll have the high risk goods. And the good news is here that nothing much changes. So if your goods are categorized as high risk, so an example of this would be any plants for planting, you should already be notifying the arrival of those goods on IPAFS or Petri Dommer, and Petri Dommer is our legacy IT system. And you should also have a Phytosanitary certificate. Those goods are currently being checked inland at places of destination, but non-EU goods are being subject to checks at border control posts and control points. And I will talk a little bit more about the difference between those two shortly. So the summary in relation to high-risk goods is that nothing should have changed. You should be pre-notifying and have a PC for those goods if they sit in high risk. For medium risk, there is a little bit of change, mainly that in January 2024, you would have to have a PC accompanying those goods alongside the pre-notification requirement that was implemented in January 2022. The the note here that I want to make is actually from an Ireland perspective, you were exempt from the pre-notification that was introduced in January 2022. So the biggest change for you in January 2024 is that you will now need to pre-notify those medium risk goods and have those goods accompanied with a phytosanitary certificate. So that comes into effect in January 2024. In terms of low risk goods, they will be exempt from controls at the border. So we'll be, rather than doing inspections at the border, we'll be doing enhanced inland surveillance at the appropriate times and throughout the supply chain to ensure that those goods that are low risk are still free from pests and diseases. The one other notable point here to point out, but again, not necessarily applicable to yourselves, is that the medium risk goods, fruit and vegetables, used to be classed as medium risk if they were from the EU. They then subsequently moved into low risk, that would then require the fact that they aren't controlled and they would not require pre-notification and a phytosanitary certificate. But because they were introduced as the notification in Jan 22, we are looking to remove from the 17th of November that pre-notification requirement on IPAFs from the 17th of November. But since that particular control was never introduced for yourselves in Ireland, like I say, all you have to worry about is the fact that from the medium risk goods is that you will require PC and pre-notification for medium risk goods from January 2024. Moving on to the next milestone is April 2024 and the 30th of April. And one of the things that changes here is that the checks will move from the places of destination, which were the inland areas, back to border control posts and control points. So the place of destination scheme will come to an end. So this was a temporary measure that we'd put in place to sort of ease that facilitation of trade, but the controls will be moving back to the border in April 2024 for those high risk goods. Similarly, on the medium risk goods, those checks will also begin at the border. So even though we introduced the requirement for pre-notification in PC, there won't be routine document, physical and identity checks until April 2024. But again, those will be conducted at the border. For low risk goods, like you say, if they're from the EU, there's no requirement for a PC or pre-notification. But if you were to have low risk goods that were of non-EU countries, there is still the requirement that you need to have a PC. There is no need to pre-notify these goods. And one of the things that DEFRA are working on in the background is doing further risk assessments to simplify the import procedure for non-EU countries on low risk goods. For want of a better word, to look to deregulate some of those lower risk goods so that you don't also require the need for a phytosanitary certificate. Obviously, these assessments take a lot of time, and as I mentioned before, there is a lot of goods that fall within low risk, so they're being conducted on a priority order. But don't worry, as soon as any of that changes, information will be given to trade well in advance of any changes so that you know what is happening. In terms of actually how the checks will occur at the border in GB, there's basically two options. One is border control posts and the other is control points. The border control posts have been in operation for decades now and for non-EU trade, and there's a very similar process in terms of importing in any country. The notable addition that we have on the plant side is the control points element, which allows inland inspection facilities. Now, these do have to be designated for both plant health purposes and customs purposes, but again, is something more for the GB importer to consider. But obviously, it removes the need for those checks to be undertaken at the BCP and can be at the importer's premises if they are eligible. One of the future areas that we're looking at in regards to AOS, in regards to plant health checks rather, is the Authorised Operator Status. So we're looking at introducing a trusted trader scheme, but more importantly, actually it's a delegation of authority in terms of that we would be looking to delegate the phytosanitary inspection to competent traders in GB that have had relevant training and meet all the eligibility criteria. Now, what I want to stress here is that this is obviously a new and novel approach, particularly in the sanitary and phytosanitary area. So one of the things that we're doing is running a pilot. And that pilot is looking to take place in Q2 of next year. But one of the things that will be going out very early next year would be the expression of interest applications to be part of that pilot. Now, it doesn't necessarily obviously involve yourselves as exporters in Ireland, but if you have regular consignments coming in with to regular importers in GB, it may be something that you want to flag to them in terms of something for them to consider. Obviously, once the pilot has ended, there'd be a further decision as to whether AOS is rolled out based on the success criteria. Again, groupage. So we normally do explaining the difference between obviously the plant health groupage models and then obviously animal health groupage models, recognizing that both can move together. But with the fact that from a phytosanitary perspective, you can have multiple commodities on a single phytosanitary certificate, it means that from a GB perspective that we would be more than happy if you had a groupage model with separate consignments on there, as long as one consignment was certified and then the lorry goes to drop those goods, pick up more goods at another place, and then those goods are certified. There is no need to recertify the original consignment as long as you aren't touching it and changing the constituent parts of it. However, one of the key things to flag is that upon import to GB, if you are using the groupage model, is that if one of those consignments are selected for inspection, then obviously we need to be able to access that consignment, and it will be decamped as much as possible for us to be able to actually get to the consignment and inspect the goods that are required. The BCPs in GB will not be equipped to store the goods, so once the inspection has been undertaken, the lorries will be reloaded and then sent. But obviously this means that the other consignments within that groupage consignment may be slightly delayed while that inspection is undertaken. So again, is something to consider as part of your movements into GB. In terms of other updates that are within the TOM, one of the things that we've looked to remove is things around transit requirements. So there is a requirement that you should pre-notify goods that would move across GB as a land bridge. So for instance, if you had internal EU market goods moving from, say, France into GB, getting trucked across GB and then moved into Ireland, there is an existing requirement that those goods should be pre-notified and then risk-based checks would be undertaken. We are looking to remove that element so that from April, there will be no need to pre-notify us of those goods using the GB land bridge. Obviously, if your transit journey is ending within GB, then you would look to do the normal import declaration process and would be subject to the appropriate SPS requirements. In terms of the IT enhancements, so this is obviously on the import pre-notification system within GB. We're looking at various ways to assist pre-notification, and one of those will be through ePhyto. So we're currently testing ePhyto with several EU member states, and there'll be two main elements to the ePhyto information. One will be obviously the instant transmission of the certificate and the data contained within the certificate from obviously the EU member state directly to the competent authority in GB, but then more importantly as well, being able to take that information from that certificate to help pre-populate a CHED-PP, so the pre-notification on iPaths. We've also introduced a thing called CSV file, and I appreciate that isn't exactly new technology, but is something that will help the commodity level information be uploaded quicker into the system rather than by inputting it manually. And for those of you that move plants for planting, obviously when you import those at the minute, you're asked whether those individual genus and species are woody or non-woody, but we're changing the system that it will be self-determined behind the scenes by the system to determine whether your plant is woody or not. I think, again, one of the things that is very keen to highlight here is what we're deeming sort of the West Coast BCPs. So there is a commitment within the TOM that further information will be published around the checks associated with West Coast BCP. So the likes of Ken Ryan, Fishguard, Holyhead, Liverpool and a few others, which are obviously the main transit connections between ourselves. There is a pending decision that we'll be looking at how those controls will be implemented in view of the milestones that I mentioned before. But the one thing to highlight at the minute is that Tom did commit that these checks will not happen at those BCPs until October 2024 at the earliest. So even though I have gone through those milestones and explained to you when those checks are likely to come in, that if you are using West Coast BCPs, they don't apply until October, though you will still continue to require the PC and pre-notification. It's just that there won't be any physical or identity checks being undertaken. So that was a very quick run through of the border target operating model. In terms of things that we have in terms of other information or resources that you can use, again, apologies for the amount of QR codes and didn't pre-warn you to have your camera phones ready. But there are newsletters that you can sign up to that go out normally on a weekly basis, informing traders of any changes or upcoming changes or things that they need to be aware of in regards to checks at GP borders. We also hold sector-specific training sessions, so although they are focused on GB importers, it will allow them to understand all the controls that are coming in place, and we'll be getting into more and more granular detail in the lead up to April and January. And there are also other webinars that we're running very similar to this one, looking at, again, those specific areas, whether it's traders need the knowledge to be able to make the IPAFS notifications and how they use the system and be able to interact with it. And then even sometimes going, like, say, back to basics in terms of explaining the reasons for phytosanitary controls and how those controls will be operated at the border. So there's a plethora of options there available for you if you wish to continue to engage in any of the training or material that we publish. So on that note then, I will stop sharing screen, and I believe, Michael, you're going to be taking over in terms of the next part.
Thanks, Jason. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Keane. I'm a plant health inspector here with the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. And I'm just going to walk you through today the process of applying for a phytosanitary cert. So I hope you can all see my screen. Can't see it myself, no. So, so when you're exporting plants and plant products to Great Britain, obviously you need to apply for a phytosanitary certificate from ourselves. And we do this on the DEFRA ECS system. It's important to do it as early as possible prior to the date of export because we need time to organise inspections or organise lab tests that will be required. When you're applying, provide as much detail as possible for the cert. Don't get too hung up on this because it will be possible for us to change it afterwards. Be aware there may be additional declarations depending on what you're exporting. And what an additional declaration is, it's just, as it says, it's an added requirement that the importing country might need. So it might be just a statement to say we don't have a certain disease in Ireland, or it could be a lab test. And that goes back to the importance of giving us the 14 days notice before you export. And then you need to liaise with if you're exporting a product that we haven't dealt with before, you may need to liaise with the importing country to determine what additional declarations are required. And as I said, if you don't have all the information, it's important to proceed with the application because then we know that there is something coming. An inspector will be able to contact you and you won't be left the day before, a couple of days before your plan to export, you won't be left looking for a cert. So then to explain what is a phytosanitary cert, it's basically an official document issued by the NPPO, that's the National Plant Protection Organisation. And so in Ireland, that's us in DEFRA. And it's a document issued by us to the NPPO of the importing country. and it confirms that your plants or plant products have been inspected and they're found to be free from pest, diseases, and soil. In some cases, if you're exporting second-hand farm machinery, that's part of the inspection. We'll make sure that the machinery is free from soil. And as I said, the additional declarations, they can be added depending on what the importing country requires. And on the right-hand side there is a sample of a phytosanitary cert, but that is a paper phytosanitary cert. And as Jason mentioned, we're now using ePhyto in Ireland. We began in June 2023, and it's the electronic equivalent of a phytosanitary cert, which basically eliminates the need for you to receive a hard copy and a stamped copy from us. So it's sent to an ePhyto hub where the receiving country can then log in and attain the phytosanitary cert. And it makes trade faster, more efficient, safer, and cheaper. So if we approve a cert today, you'll get it straight away in an email. Whereas if it's a paper phytosanitary cert, we have to approve it, we have to print it, we have to stamp it, and we have to post it out to you. The UK is currently not connected to the ePhyto hub, but they accept ePhytos from Ireland. So from everyone that's going to be exporting to Great Britain, you will be receiving an ePhyto. So I'm going to walk you through the process of obtaining a phytosanitary cert. And that's the link, but we can make that available to you if you need it. And this is the screen that will come up when you click into that link. And it's fairly straightforward. You click on the button to create a new application. And this page here just shows you all the certs that you can apply for. You just have to click next, and you have to click the two boxes and hit next again. And then you'll be shown with this page where you have to prove you're not a robot, enter in what you see, and click proceed. Sometimes it can be difficult to see them, so it gives you a chance here to refresh it and then proceed. So then this is what you're going to be faced with, and this is the important part. When you're applying for a phytosanitary cert, you'll get a drop-down menu, and you make sure you select Phytosanitary Plant and Horticulture Certificate. There's a few more on the list there that you could, it's easy to confuse them, so just make sure it's Phytosanitary Plant and Horticulture Certificate. It's not the end of the world if you apply for another one, but it's just we mightn't see it. If you go in for a pre-export cert or a re-export cert, we mightn't look at it, and next thing you'll be calling us or emailing us wondering where your cert is. But you can just apply again. Then this is the next page you'll be faced with. So you'll fill in all your details here. It's important to get all this, like we can change it, but it's important to get it right because the important countries can be, they can pull you up on it if the information isn't correct. So fill in all your details. The email address here, this is important, especially with ePhyto. This email address is the email that you will receive the ePhyto to. So if you make a mistake with that email address, you won't receive your phytosanitary cert straight away. You fill in your consignment type, that's just a drop-down menu, commercial or private, and then your plant health registration number. Then the next page is where it's going. Again, make sure your consignee name and consignee address is correct. The country of origin, that's if it's going to be Ireland, or if you've received the plant from somewhere else, you'll put the country of origin in there. Place of origin is the county you're in Ireland. Distinguishing marks then is the container and the seal number. If it's on a container in the back of a truck, you put them in there, and it's important to get them right. When it's going, we usually won't issue a phytosanitary cert if we don't have them. And you put in the commercial value of the consignment. And then this is where you fill in the details of the actual consignment itself. So the number of packages, it could be bags, pallets, crates, it depends on what it is. You'll get a drop-down menu here. As I said there, if your type isn't there, just select not available, and a little screen will come up and you'll be able to type it in yourself. You put the common name of the plant that you're exporting, and then you put the botanical name, and you put the number of units. So the units is the weight or the number of pieces. And again, the drop-down menu will come and you'll be able to fill that in. And if you have more than one consignment detail, it'll give you another. You just hit the plus button there, and you can enter. You just repeat the process again for as many as you need. Like I said earlier, if you don't have the exact details, it's important to enter something. If you know you're going to be exporting something in the next 14 days, enter something so that we know it will put you on our list. We can call out, do the inspection. We can change, you know, if the exact quantities of that change, we can change that. Another thing, if you have a big, you know, you might have a lot of plants in one consignment, you can upload a list instead of going through this whole process and keep adding consignment details. You can upload an Excel file or even just a Word file of all the plants, and we can just write on the Phytosanitary search seed list attached. So it's a useful tool, and it'll save you a lot of time if you're exporting a lot of plants. And then this is the next page that you'll be faced with after you fill in your consignment details. You have to fill out how it's going to get to the country. So it's fairly straightforward. You fill out the country it's going to, the point of entry, and the date of departure. The date of departure is more so for us so that we know when it's going. It's not going to be on the Phytosanitary cert. A lot of people think that the date of departure that they enter is the one that's going to be on the cert. It's not. It's just that we know when you're planning to export it so we can get out and do the inspection before that. Any treatment that the plants or products receive can be put in here. It's not always required, but for some commodities it is. And then the date suitable for inspection, that's to tell the inspector when, you know, if a certain day doesn't suit you, if you're busy or if you're not available, you can put in certain dates that do suit you so we can try and organize the inspection around that. The address where the inspection will take place, the contact name and number and email. So this is different to the name, the number. Well, it might be different. It might not be different to the people to the details they entered earlier. It's just that this is who the inspector will call to organize the inspection. So just important to know the difference between that and the earlier one. And then this is the additional declarations. Don't worry about it. If you don't have it, the inspector can find out and will fill it out. This is other information. This won't appear on a Phytosanitary cert. This is just something if you want to let the inspectors know of something, like if your address is a certain spot but the inspection will take place somewhere else and you want to put in any additional information, you can just put it in there for us. As I said earlier, if you want to upload a plant list, you can select your plant list here, or you can send it to the inspector when you're talking to them, organizing the inspection. You can just tell them I'll email it on to you and we can upload the plant list for you there. And then after that, you just click submit and we'll get that on our system and then we'll be able to contact you. You'll have a local inspector wherever you are in the country. They'll contact you and organize an inspection. So then I'm going to repeat a few things that Jason said in his presentation. It's important to know your risks. So like Jason said, you can go on to the DEFRA plant health portal and you can check the risk of the plants that you're exporting. So I'll just give you a bit of a detail of the different, what's needed for each one. So high risk, this is all currently in place. It needs a phyto cert. Some of them need pre-export requirements such as additional declarations. They already need to be pre-notified, and there'll be 100% documentary check and 5 to 100% systematic risk-based checks and post-import surveillance. So then for medium risk, from the 31st of January 2024, you'll also need a Phytosanitary cert and additional declarations. They'll need to be pre-notified to the UK authorities. There's less of a documentary check, but it still will be checked. And the ID physical check will be done post-import surveillance. And as Jason mentioned, low risk is everything else. There's no requirement for pre-notification or phyto certs, but there will be post-import surveillance. All right. And then pre-notification, Jason already mentioned this too. High and medium goods need to be pre-notified on the iPass system. Again, it's not the responsibility of the exporter, it's the responsibility of the agent or the importer. But it's important for you to know that it has to be done. High risk goods currently need it, and medium risk goods need to be done from the 31st of January 2024. There's another bit of repetition here. Me and Jason should have talked a bit more before we did the presentations, but you don't need a PC from next year. You won't need a PC or pre-notification if you're just using the UK as an land bridge, but you will need a signed declaration that they're in Phytosanitary transit and are packaged in such a way that there's no risk of spreading a pest through the UK. So the key messages from this is that identify if you need phytosanitary cert. So basically it's knowing the risk category of your product. So as I said, you can check the BTOM risk categorization. So examine the supply chain. So look within your own company and determine who's responsible for meeting the UK import requirements. What information is required for pre-notification, basically what certs are required if there's additional declarations required. And apply for the phytosanitary cert as early as possible and engage with your local plant health inspector. So we'll call you, we'll try and be as flexible as possible, but the more time we have to plan it, then the more flexible we can be. So on that note, I'd like to thank you all and we'll take any questions.
Thanks, Michael, for that presentation, and just thanks also to Jason for his presentation earlier. I'm not just a reminder, if there are questions that people want to ask, they can do so in the questions box. Just type in your question and we can see it and we can answer the question for you. I'm not seeing anything at the minute, and maybe to kick off with a few questions. Just Jason, you mentioned IPAFs and that this will be, responsibility largely of the importer in GB to carry out this pre-notification. Are there any pieces of information that the importer will need, to obtain from the exporter in Ireland?
Yeah, so I think, like you say, the import process is, generally speaking, is the same as if you're importing the goods into Ireland in terms of the information requirements. There hasn't been anything additional that we've introduced. I think, like you say, in terms of knowing the additional stuff that's not included on the phytosanitary certificate will be roughly the time of arrival into GB. So understanding sort of those trade routes between yourselves, either as the exporter and the importer, and knowing roughly what time those goods are going to be available for inspection, because obviously that helps, similar to yourselves on our side, in terms of arranging inspectors to come and have a look at the goods. I think what will probably help as well is agreeing those commodity codes in advance. Now, obviously, they are needed for sort of obviously any of the HMRC customs declarations, but ensuring that that information and the codes used in your HMRC declaration is exactly the same as the ones that are used in the IPAFs, because the two systems do talk to each other to make sure they're talking about the same consignments when clearing them. So agreeing those commodity codes up front, and then making sure that you use them, both the same ones in your customs declaration and your IPAFs notification. Again, not something as exporters you need to worry about, but definitely worth having that conversation with the GB importer. And like you say, ensuring that the phytosanitary certificate has been issued and has got the relevant special requirements, those additional declarations on there, if applicable, is the main things, I would say, John.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Just another question. Will there be controls applying to trade samples, laboratory samples, e-commerce?
So it is something that we are looking at in terms of reviewing the policy area, and you picked three very distinct areas that may end up with different policies associated with them. So there is still an outstanding decision on those, but as it stands today, if it was either e-commerce, lab samples or trade samples, they would still fall under the commercial sort of rules, so would require a phytosanitary certificate and pre-notification, depending obviously what categories it fell into, but it is something that we are looking to review. Okay.
And are there any prohibited products?
So on the prohibition front, there are prohibitions, but the good news is that none of them apply to the Republic of Ireland. I can provide you with a link that you can disseminate out to other stakeholders, which will list sort of what the prohibitions are in relation to the Annex 6 prohibitions, which are ones that have been deemed obviously very high risk and can't be imported at all. But again, none of those apply to Ireland. And then there's a sort of a second sort of degree of prohibitions, which they aren't allowed to be imported into GB. Specific genus and species aren't allowed to be imported into GB until they've had a risk assessment complete on them. Now, again, none of those apply to to Ireland, and it's predominantly it's outside of EU member states that it applies to. So although I've just said the prohibitions, none that apply to Ireland.
Okay. I just see one question in the chat: is importing from GB similar, or is this outside the briefs webinar? So yeah, so it's a similar process in reverse. We similarly require pre-notification, and we do that through the shed entry document, the shed PP, and there's also a requirement then to notify your consignment through the DEFRA portal, the import portal as well. And generally that notification is done 24 hours in advance. And similarly, all regulated products require a Phytosanitary certificate on entry. So it's very much in reverse.
To be honest on those, you picked up on a really good point there, actually. In terms of the pre-notification requirements and the time limits associated with imports into GB, so if your goods are arriving by air freight or Ro-Ro, we require 4 hours pre-notification. Any other forms of transport, so whether it's deep sea freight, which obviously is not applicable, I would suggest for these types of movements between our countries, it would be 24 hours.
Okay, so that's important. So 4 hours for air freight and Ro-Ro, and okay, deep sea 24 hours. Okay. Just another question, Jason, I had, and I think it was asked at another webinar we had a couple of weeks ago, and it was just around: do low-risk products have to enter via BCP?
So the good news is no. They don't need to enter through a plant health approved BCP, because obviously there will be no checks being undertaken. But obviously one thing to double check for yourselves is whether there are any other regulatory impacts for that particular good that you're exporting. So for instance, if anything was subject to maybe, I don't know, organics marketing regulations, then obviously there may be requirements for you to report to a BCP. But if it was solely from a phytosanitary perspective, if it was low risk goods, then you don't have to attend a BCP or move through an approved BCP for plant health purposes. Obviously, you'll still have all your customs declaration requirements and stuff that you need to do there. But yeah, so the answer is no.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Another question is coming into the question box. I want to export open ground hedge plants such as laurel, Griselinia escalonia. Do I need to apply every time? So I presume that this is multiple trades.
So yes, you will need to apply. So every time, like you say, you import those goods into GB, they'll require a phytosanitary certificate and a pre-notification.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Any other questions? I'm not seeing anything coming into the question box. Just another quick question I had, Jason. Is there a list of CN codes for the regulated products? Do you? So what we've done on the plant health side, and again, I can provide you a couple of links, and it links back into, I think it was maybe my second or third slide, is I think we recognize that from plant health purposes, CN codes are quite broad in terms of their definitions, and sometimes don't necessarily, they either cover too many commodities or they don't cover any commodities that are regulated. So what we've done on the plant health side is the first step is to look up your risk categorization to determine whether your goods need a PC or pre-notification. And then you can use the tool that was in that Excel spreadsheet to type in your commodity code, your scientific name of whatever you're importing, and then it will give you a list of the commodity codes. Now, what those commodity codes are, they're the ones that map into IPAFs. So if you select that commodity code, you would be able to find that genus and species on IPAFs. So it's not a direct link where I can always say plant X is always going to be this commodity code, because there can be a few that could be used and could be applicable. But what we want to do is be able to give you as many of those codes to be able to make your informed decision as an importer into GB or at the point of export, so that you know what commodity codes are available. Okay. I'm just seeing. Okay, we have a few questions coming into the chat, into the question box. Those all is applied to supply bedding plants from Northern Ireland to garden centres in Ireland. So the answer is no. Obviously, there's free move. There's free movement between north and south in terms of plant material. And I don't know, Jez, you can answer, but I know there is slight change in terms of the Windsor framework, in terms of the movement of plant material then from GB then to NI, I think.
Yeah, so in terms of GB into NI, like you say, it will be still under free internal movement, so unfettered market access. There are obviously rules around sort of the origins of the goods and what they apply to. And again, I can provide some links on gov.uk that give you further information. So for instance, if you were moving the goods, if they were Republic of Ireland sort of origin, and you were moving them from a port in Northern Ireland into GB, they wouldn't necessarily be eligible for unfettered market access and would be subject to the normal sort of SPS controls. Going the other way in terms of GB sending stuff to Northern Ireland, there's two schemes, Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme and the Northern Ireland Plant Health Label, but I appreciate that doesn't necessarily need to be covered in this, but again, I can pop some links for that as well.
That's brilliant, brilliant. Is there any major difference between the rules regarding potted and bare root plants?
So they would both all be considered sort of plants for planting. So in terms of the category, risk category they sit in, there would be no difference. They would be considered high risk and require a PC and a Phytosanitary certificate. There obviously may be different frequencies of inspections associated with those goods, depending on whether they're obviously like woody or non-woody. And again, we publish on the Plant Health portal all the relative inspection frequencies associated with goods that are imported into GB.
Okay. Is a phytocert needed for sending rose budwood? Sure.
Yes, it would do. Yes, it was, like you say, again, would be considered as a plant for planting, so would require a PC and pre-notification.
And I think this is the same. What category do hedge plants come under? Low risk or other? It's high risk, I think. Is that correct?
You are right, John. Yeah, so any plant for planting would be considered high risk.
Okay. What risk category will exporting Christmas trees come under?
That is an excellent question. It is stated within the risk categories for both EU and non-EU, but it's dependent on whether it's over or under 3 meters. And for the life of me, I can't remember off the top of my head which area sits in which category. I believe the high above 3 meters is high risk, and under 3 meters is medium.
Okay, okay, thanks, Jason. If I need to send seed that originated in the UK back to the UK, is that seed treated the same as EU?
So if it was originated in GB, we send it to yourselves, and then, like you say, it's processed in any form. Then obviously, if it gets sent back into GB, if it's one of the high or medium species, then it would require PC and Phytosanitary certificate. But again, I would recommend checking the risk categories on that, because not all seed is in high or medium.
Okay, okay. Okay, can I also confirm there's no change in sending Christmas trees from Ireland to Northern Ireland, so that there is no change in that respect? Is export from ROI to NI staying the same for the foreseeable future? Yes, so NI are implementing EU regulations, so yeah, so there's free movement then between north and south. Just obviously to note there in terms of the need for plant passports and that, but once there's no other controls. And again, I think I've answered the next question, just clarify free movement of plants from Northern Ireland to end users in NI, yes. So just see, is there any other question? I think that's them all, I think. So
yeah. I would just probably add one quick point, John. So recognizing that most of the questions around sort of what's my risk category or what do I need to do for my particular goods, if you obviously have a look at the risk categories and then you're not confident with sort of what category your goods are sat in, then you can email Plant Health EU Expert Inquiries at defra.gov.uk, and again, I can share that email address with you, John, and then you can send your query to the team there, and they'll be able to look up and respond to you formally.
Okay, that's brilliant. I'm not seeing anything else in the question box. Oh, sorry, one question: charges? Any charging? For fees?
So generally speaking, for imports into GB, obviously there'll be the fees associated with issuing your export PC issued by DEFRA. But in regards to imports into GB, broadly speaking, there will be two sets of fees. One will be obviously the plant health fees associated with import into GB. So that's for your physical identity and documentary checks. And again, we've got those published on the plant health portal, so you can see the fees that will apply to those. The second fee is what I'll call stevedore fees, but you may have heard being referenced as the common user charge fee. The common user charge fee will be a fee that for the stevedores in terms of getting and operating the BCP sites, and the CUC, so the common user charge fee, will only apply to government-run facilities, so ones like Sevington. There's been a consultation recently that went out to trade around what the model that will be used for that, and we're just taking feedback on board at the minute with a view to publish obviously the final findings shortly. But if you don't use a government-run facility, because recognizing that most BCPs are commercially run entities, they will obviously apply their own fees. So what I would suggest is obviously if you're the GB importer, or depending on what your Incoterms are, is making sure that you determine what your route of entry will be, and then determine what the fees would be for those BCPs in regards to obviously the stevedore side of things. I'm probably oversimplifying, is it? There is more to it than just the stevedores, but it covers the operation cost of the BCP.
Okay, and I suppose those charges, Jason, they largely apply to the GB importer as distinct from the Irish exporter. And
absolutely,
just to say, just in terms of, I suppose, our export certification charges, so there is currently no charge there at the minute, but that is currently under review. So from an Irish perspective. So, okay. I'm not seeing any other questions in the box, and with that, sure, I'll look at to say thank you to our presenters here today. So thanks to Jason and Victoria, who've joined us from DEFRA, and thanks very much for giving your time to presenting at this webinar this afternoon. Also, just thank Michael for his presentation, and to thank the team, in the background putting together the webinar as well. Just to say that the webinar will be recorded and it'll be available through the different websites, and if there are any unanswered questions, we will be replying to them as well. So, thank you very much. Thank you all for tuning in.